Okay, welcome. Welcome to Clear Days with Ned. It's Ned Miro here, and welcome to Rewrite Your Old Drinking Habits. And this is all about looking at your drinking habit and how we can start to manipulate the standard cycle that drinking habits have. And I'll just share my screen, and so you can see the actual cycle that occurs, and it all starts with, if I move this across, it all starts with, think of a cue. There's a trigger that happens, and then a cue, um, where it can be a person, a place, um, a time, a location, a stress, a pressure, something happens, and then we do the routine, which is the action, and then and obviously over time that is done very habitually, and it's a very subconscious. I'm not even thinking about it. Um, and an example of that is when you drive home. Have you ever driven home from work and you've done it for years, and then the following week you drove home to work, but you actually moved house and you found yourself driving to your old home rather than your new home? I know that's I know that's happened to me. So routines are very powerful because over time we save energy, and the brain saves energy by not having to rethink, how to change gears, or rethink how to drive again, or rethink how to how to tie our shoelaces, and rethink how to drive home, right? Or even drinking for that matter, right? And then from the cue to the routine comes the reward, and obviously with drinking, the reward is, the escape, or the dopamine, obviously. Okay, but that's what we'll be looking at tonight in this mini workshop, and it's called Rewrite Your Old Drinking Habits: Why Changing the Middle Step Beats Willpower Every Time. And this took me a while to get right, to understand. I've actually got a book here that has got a lot of sections in it that I've gone through, but this book inspired me when it came to changing my habits. Okay, it's by Charles Duhigg, and a lot of the information that you'll see tonight is by Charles, who studied habit science extensively, and he's worked with, the um, top, entrepreneurs and uh, sports coaches, like from all over the world, and he gives example after example of how you can manipulate the habit cycle to still get, the cue will still come. You can manipulate the routine and still get the reward at the end, rather than trying or attempting to work on changing the habit completely by just white knuckling it, which is what I did for a very long period of time. We're just going to talk about the middle step, which is the routine. That's the source, this magic spice behind changing your drinking habits. Okay, so um, if, like I said, changing the entire habit um, doesn't feel impossible when you're really, really motivated. Where you get home and there's the massive, cue and trigger of the kitchen, which is a massive cue for people when they go into they walk into the kitchen after a hard day's work. And it's a massive cue. There's glasses, there's so visual cues. There's, obviously drinks in the fridge, cooling off, or there could be a bottle of wine on the dining room table, um, or wine glasses, whatever it is, whatever paraphernalia you got going, right? But that's a massive cue. Um, and it sometimes feels like impossible to do the whole thing when you aren't so motivated, right? And that's because when we're attempting to change the habit, we're attempting to change the trigger, like the cue, right? The routine, which is the drinking, and then the reward and resisting. I don't want to get the dopamine. I don't want to get the dopamine. So we're attempting to resist 3 points rather than just focusing on one and letting the others just play out, right? So you're basically, your brain is fighting on all fronts, and it's really difficult to do that every single day rather than just focusing on one aspect of the habit cycle. So the makeup is the cue, routine, and the reward. And the cue has triggers. The routine is what we do, so it's action. And the reward is obviously the dopamine hit. We're getting some form of relief, right? And that's what's occurring. And most people, they attempt to remove stress in their life, or they attempt to fight the reward and resist the urge, right? But both those strategies require a lot of willpower. And you think about it, if you're waking up at 8, 7, 6, 7 or 8 o'clock, right? And you're doing what you have to do for the day. I mean, not many people wake up at 8 these days, do they? But if you are, great, good on you. But if you're waking up, you're getting ready for work, and you're constantly making decisions like during the course of the day, and you're using your prefrontal cortex, and you're constantly making decisions all the time. And there's a lot of no's in there, and there's the yeses, and there's a no, and there's yeses, and there's all these decisions that we're making, a lot of which we could automate, by the way. We're making all these decisions. By the time we get home, and we don't have any more responsibility for the day, we don't want to have to be making any more decisions, because that's called decision fatigue. We've fatigued our decision making capabilities, and we just want to relax. And then that's when the cue comes in, and the routine is so easy, just to pour yourself a glass of wine when you said you weren't going to do it. And then once that you pour that first glass of wine, you know, or you have that first beer, um, and and it feels so great, right? Because it's getting rid of, you know, it's giving you relief, it's also giving escape. So it's a double whammy, right? So it just gives you this euphoric sensation, right? Um, and the brain remembers that, right? And then, yeah, obviously you're on and away. You're on the reward, right? But then where we get in trouble is obviously going from 2 drinks to 4. When we said we weren't going to do it. But I did this so many times, and there were so many day ones, and I once saw a sign that said day 1 or 1 day. And I said to myself, one day I will figure this thing out. And this was a massive part of it. The massive part of this was keeping the cue, keeping the reward, changing the routine. And when I first heard that, I thought, Charles, what are you tripping on? What the hell do you mean keep everything but change the routine? Like, how does that work? And I'll show you how it works, right? But it's just focusing on the routine, because the brain does not care where the relief or the dopamine comes from. Because remember, dopamine is safety. It means that you're getting your relief, right? And safety and relief equates to safety, equates to survival. And that's where your brain is concerned about. It's not concerned about thrival. It's concerned about survival. And dopamine equates to that. How you get that, how you attain that, there's so many different ways, right? And this is all about changing the routine, but still attaining the dopamine, right, over that time. Okay, so here's why it works. The brain doesn't care, like I said, where it gets the dopamine from. It just wants the hit. So you give it a new source that doesn't wreck you for the next day. You get the same relief, zero, different routine, but zero hangover, zero feeling like crap the next day. Okay. And this is what was happening to me, right? right, real life, I would get stressed. Um, and for me, the cue was early afternoon where I would start to think about alcohol and how I would pour myself a drink when I got home at the end of the day, you know, especially when I was going through a divorce and there was no one home, there was no responsibilities, there was no accountability. It was so easy to pour myself a drink because there was no one around, right? And um, that was a big eye opener for me by having no one around and me drinking, right? And looking at that, and going, okay. So if I flip that, rather than having no one around, imagine I changed my routine to having someone around. Would I still drink? I really was desperate not to drink, but I was still doing it because of the big routine that I had put in place of having no responsibility, really, you know, when I got home. Okay. So my cue was at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll be thinking about it, have a pretty stressful day. And then when I got home, I was alone. It was the end of the day. No eyes were on me. And I just went to town on red wine, usually, um, every night. Okay. Um, and what I did and what I needed to do was I knew that I needed to change, but I tried so many times to change everything about, my drinking, like so many different strategies and so many different techniques. Okay. And um, I want to give you a framework to think about and to implement when you're looking to think about like the first part of the equation of the habit loop, right? And I've got the acronym here of CAR, so it's just a bit easy to remember. So it's called CARB. So C is the cue, right? Like which is the urge and the trigger that comes up. A is the routine, which is the action that you take, and R is the reward. So CAR is a really easy acronym to remember when it comes to, the habit, the science of this habit cycle that we're talking about. Okay. So most people think the problem is usually like the drinking, okay? But it runs deeper than that. I want you to look at this list that I've got here, and I'll blow this up, and I want you to start to think about, what's actually happening before the urge, because every second of every day, you have got a thought, which goes to a feeling, which goes to an action, which goes to a result, which creates your destiny. Every single second of the day, you've got a thought, a feeling, an action, result. Thought, feeling, action, result. Now, these thoughts of they're on a hyper freeway, right? Hyper speed freeway, because the thoughts that you have happened thousands of times. So the neural pathway around the drinking is extremely, just happens in a split second. You don't even know that you're thinking about it. Before you know it, there's this feeling, right? And then the feeling is either relief or escape or comfort or reward or whatever it is. But for the cue, you're looking and identifying it. You're looking to thinking about, um, you know, the time. Like this is all about pattern recognition. It could be a certain time, that you get the feeling, the urge to drink, or it could be a place, it could be a person, right? Good or bad, right? It could be a thought, or it could be a routine. Okay. For me, it was time. For me, it was 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd start thinking about it. Okay. Every single day. It just came. Before that, wasn't even thinking about it. I was focused on what I needed to do, and it wasn't even in my mind. But then, as sure as eggs, it would come at 2, 3 o'clock, and then that snowball effect of negotiating with myself and saying that I wasn't going to drink, and I ended up drinking and going to the bottle shop and going to different bottle shops so they don't know that I'm drinking every day and having all the bottle shops. that I know around my area, and a lot of people can relate to this. Okay. So the way that you can identify your cue, right? There's, like, for example, a stress cue, right? You finish work, um, you just finished work, and you sat on the lounge, right? And you open up wine, right? So you get mental relief straight away. So the cue, or it's not about, oh, I'm opening up the wine. That's the cue. That's the trigger. The trigger, or the cue, is when you finished work. When you finish work, you sit on the couch. When you finish work, you're in the kitchen. When you finish work, you're looking at a wine glass. When you finish work, you open up the back door and you can't wait to take that first sip. Right? They're the cues. Okay. And then we do the action. Okay, we do the action. Right? Loneliness cue. Your partner leaves home for town. Left home, left town, right, on a business trip or whatever it is, right? So you're alone at night. As soon as you're alone at night, right, there's comfort, right? And with comfort, there may come some emotional numbness as well, okay? Because you're alone, you're feeling lonely, right? So you want some numbness so you don't feel lonely anymore. And that happens, when, if you do have a partner, they leave for the night, right? The freedom queue. The freedom queue is a big one because a lot of people are stuck in their jobs, and they've been having responsibility, and they've had, they're in mid-management, and there's so many decisions to make. Like every hour, every 10 minutes of the day, they may having to make decisions. The last thing you want is to make another decision. It's like, if you're a chef and you've been cooking all day in the kitchen, the last thing you want to do is go home and cook for yourself. You just probably get takeout. I know a lot of chefs that did that, right? They just get takeout, or they've prepared something, but they don't like to cook at home because that's what they do all day, right? The next one cue that you got to look out for is the anxiety cue, right? So it's like, it's something to do with anxiety. It's never in the moment. It's always, you're thinking like in advance, of what's going to occur, and you're feeling nervous about it. So the drinks, or having drinks, is going to help you with, um, obviously going to help you with dealing with the social event. Um, and the boredom cue, right? This is a big one for a lot of people. We are more connected than ever on this planet, but there are more lonely people on this planet than ever before. And unfortunately, that's just the trend that's coming from, not just from COVID, but before that, right? But COVID did have um, a big turning point with people feeling lonely. And, when you're bored and there's nothing happening, if you don't plan anything, then it just defaults to something that's really simple and basic. And that's really just simple and basic is scrolling while you're drinking. Right? I know that's a real, something real that happens, and you don't even know how much you're drinking when you're scrolling. Okay. So most people say that their cue is the alcohol, but it's actually either stress or emptiness or silence or relentlessness or loneliness or reward seeking or mental exhaustion. So look at that. Look at that pattern, and it'll give you more clarity around what's actually happening before the action, before the routine. And if you have more awareness around that, you can start to manipulate the loop, right? This habit loop here that I've got. You can start to manipulate that. But this was all about the cue, about, what happens when you're triggered, okay? Because that leads straight into the reward, right? So now we wanted to talk about, what do you do, right? When the routine is wanting to be changed. What do you do? What are some examples? So I'm going to give you some examples now. Okay. But firstly, with the cue, always think about, okay, I'm here, I'm drinking, right? And I just said I wasn't going to drink. Ask yourself, what happened before this? What was I thinking? What was I feeling before this? What was actually happening? Was it a time, a place, a person? And you can start to think, well, this is going to happen tomorrow again, and it's going to make me changing my routine even harder. So maybe I need to look at, what's actually triggering me off, you know. But from there, let's look at changing the routine. And that's what this mini workshop's all about, is looking at changing the routine. So here are examples of how you can manipulate your routine. You're still going to get the cue. Let's just be totally pragmatic about this. You're still going to get the cue. It's not like one day, oh, I'm just going to focus on my routine. The cue's still going to be there, right? We're not going to fight the cue. Let it come. Here it comes, whatever, right? It's there. We just want to focus on changing the routine. And with all routine, there's one ingredient that Charles talks about in his The Power of Habit, and why people do what they do, and how to change it. He talks about belief, right? So when you are looking to go from an old routine to a new routine, which will give you dopamine at the end, right? There's got to be this belief. You got to have the body and the mind in congruency together when you're getting into it. So, for example, the first one is all about, after work, so the old one would have been pour a drink immediately. The new routine is a 10-minute walk with your favorite podcast that you've already set up. That's what you do, right? You do this 10-minute walk with a podcast, right? Preparation is key with all of these, right? But you're setting yourself up. You really want to get into this podcast, or you really want to listen to this, this piece of music. You know that the cue's coming, right? You know it because it's been coming for weeks and months. You know it's coming, or it's a certain, it's Wednesday, and that is your Friday because you work on weekends or whatever it is. So you know it's going to come on the Wednesday. So if you know it's going to come on the Wednesday, you prepare yourself. You prepare yourself with a 10-minute walk, a podcast, or a variation of that. Okay. Loneliness at night. So the old one is drinking to fill a space, right? Loneliness at night. If you know you're going to be alone, right? Think about, setting yourself up with a friend where you call and you connect emotionally and you have a connection, and you force yourself to have this call with a friend. You already organize it. You say it's Wednesday. Let's use the example of the person that works on weekends and has Wednesday as their Friday night, for example, right? You say to them, are you doing anything on Wednesday? Let's have a phone chat. Let's have a Zoom call. Let's have a voice messaging session, or just a friendly chat. If you are going to be lonely, right? The weekends are a massive cue for people, especially if they work the traditional Monday to Fridays, and Friday night, the footy's on, and it's balmy, and, and it's just so easy just to grab a six-pack on the way home because, you don't have to face responsibilities on a Saturday. New routine is a late night drive, is a movie, could be even a drive-in movie, or a gym session, right? Something different. You still get the reward, as in, there's excitement, there's an escape of a new routine. You're doing something for yourself, you're doing something for your future self, right? Social anxiety, right? Drinking before you arrive, right? So this is where, you implement everything that you can in preparation, where, you can make sure that you've got your non-alcoholic drinks, organized of what you're going to have when you get to this social event. And you can do some internal work, some breathing, some visualization. You've got, what you're going to say if people are offering you drinks, but even having a sparkling water with a slice of lime in hand with a straw all the time, you're not going to get many questions. And you know what? At the end of the day, no one really cares if you're drinking or you're not drinking, right? Maybe years ago, people used to care about if you were drinking or not, but these days, no one really cares. Right? No one, right? Really, I used to think about, oh my God, I'm not drinking. What are they going to think? I think I'm an alcoholic and all that sort of stuff. Whatever. People don't care. People care about, like about having fun and about the excitement, and people move on. You know. So be prepared with your old cue when it comes to social anxiety. The boredom at home, drinking while scrolling or watching TV. The new routine could be a hobby, a learning challenge, some gaming, or a hobby, but something that you've wanted to try and do for a long time, or you did when you were a kid, and it was like, man, I really want to get into crocheting, you know. I know my older one is getting into it, and she's 13, and apparently for 13-year-olds it's not cool, but it's pretty cool when she's making all these granny squares, and now she's making a whole jumper for winter. It's brilliant. So there's so many things, but it's about belief. And also the other piece I could add to that is about your attitude, about I'm going to give this a go. This is what I really want to try. Emotional overload is a big one for a lot of people, especially when there's fight or flight happening, and you've been rejected for the week, or you feel dejected for the week, and that's a real big cue, and that's something that you need to be aware of, where having, again, access to someone that you can talk to, or someone that you can leave a message with, or somewhere where you can do some exercise, or even journaling, and it's about, obviously doing something for yourself at that moment when you know it's going to come. And when I talk about cues into rewards, I'm talking about, not the off chance that it's going to happen. I'm talking about your day to day. This is going to happen. You're going to feel the way that you're feeling. And it's just preparing for that. Celebration triggers as well. So let's celebrate. Again, it's all about planning and, having a beautiful experience, with a mineral water with a slice of lime and ice, instead. And really just focusing on having deep, meaningful connections when you are celebrating, and then cravings during witching hour. And I know that this was a big one for me between 6 and 8, where the way I got over it was, I would eat earlier, okay? But for me, the big thing that I did was I got accountability. And the way that I got accountability is that I was in a group where a whole bunch of other people were being accountable with each other. And I guess that's why I formed Clear Days with Ned. I've had a few Facebook groups, but I find this a lot better being in the school environment, because I've got there's courses and all that in there that you guys have got access to, and I can do these classrooms as well. So there's a lot more rigidity in a setup like this. But I got coached, and I also got accountability to change my routine at 6 o'clock from no connection and drinking to feeling connected, being able to talk to someone and getting the dopamine hit of having that connection and doing something for my future self. And that's where I was getting my dopamine. The cue was still coming, especially I'm talking like really early on, like the first couple of weeks, right? Which for me, I didn't really sleep that much. And it was difficult because I was just still having my normal day. I was still doing everything. I didn't take time off or anything like that. I was just doing my normal day. But the big thing was that the pain was so great. I wanted to change something about my life. So I just decided the cue, the trigger, the feeling, the urges, they're all going to come, be that as it may. I'm just going to focus on a new routine. And I got the reward. I got the reward of hanging out with people, like-minded people, getting coached as well and getting accountability around that, support around that, connection, and it being fun as well. And what's what really turned the tide, turned the ship around for me. Racing thoughts, another one, big one with routine is, when you've had a really big day and you want to shut the brain off, and this is where you focus on, if you've got a lot to do for the day, you just focus on 30-minute intervals. And then wanting to relax, because a lot of the time the meanings that we have with alcohol equates to relaxation, but when we were a kid and we wanted to relax, we had so many different ways that we could relax, and alcohol didn't even come into our frame. Okay, so it doesn't have to be about alcohol. It can be intentionally winding down with your partner, and if you don't have a partner, with tea, with music, with low lighting, whatever the case may be. Okay, so when it comes to, if the cue hits, we're talking about changing your routine by getting connection in that time, rather than being alone or pretending that everything's okay and you're drinking. It's all about the big lesson for me, right? I'm 1,200 days where I haven't had a drink, right? I've been alcohol free, but the biggest thing for the first few hundred days was just having constant connection with people and not pretending that everything was okay. It was messy, it was erratic, it was volatile, but there was always that connection and accountability, which really, really helped. So when the cue hits, when the trigger's there, do your push-ups, do a walk, listen to some inspirational music, dance like no one's watching, install one or a plethora of these, and just stick to it. Stick to it and see if you can do it for 5 days. Between 3 to 5 days, you can train your body to ride it out, to do something different, and then it'll start to get used to that. Because once you get through the routine of doing a new routine and you're getting the reward, your brain will be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. It wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be, because we paint all these pictures, and then it ends up being fine. Okay, it ends up being fine. Okay, and your nervous system reacts to that. That conclusion of, I went through something new, and it wasn't, dire. It actually worked out fine, and I'm safe. So if I've done it once, you can do it again, and you can do it again, and you can do it again. Okay. So for the next 5 days, identify your cue, what triggers you. There's something that triggers you every day or every second day or every week, whatever it is, and identify that. Identify what it is and make it easier for yourself by knowing that this is what triggers me, whether it be a person or a time or the end of a week, whatever it is, and start to manipulate the trigger as well, right? But really choose the new routine. If you're aware of the trigger, but you're choosing your routine, okay, you're going to have somewhere to fall, which is your new routine. And then notice the reward. It's a different path, but the same relief, right? And just track it and just track the middle and see how you go. Okay, track the middle and see how you go. And like I said, you don't have to change anything. You just got to change your routine and everything will follow. And I'd love to know if you are trying this, what will be your new routine? Remember, 98% of people can't do this journey alone. They need some help. I know going through the thousands of, messages and the hundreds of thousands of people that have been in different types of groups that I've been in, most people need help. And that's where the accountability support comes into it. So if you are, and this is a call out to anyone, if you feel that you've had a skinful and you just want to try something different, like just try the routine piece, but you don't know, like you want to do it with someone and you just want a bit of support, then I do run tiny challenges all the time. And what that is 3 days where at the routine hour, right, or around there, or we discuss it, I keep you accountable. We go through that hour, you know, or that half an hour together. So instead of you going for a drink, you're accountable with Ned, right? And this is a free tiny challenge that I do. It goes for 3 days. If anyone is ready to do this routine change, then put your hand up, send me a DM, or even, send me a private message or leave a comment, whatever you want, and we'll do it. We'll do it, and all it takes is belief. If you've got belief that you've done it for 3 days and you've got that belief and you borrow someone else's nervous system that's already done it for 1,200 days, it's going to put you in good stead for the rest of the week. So if you feel that you are ready to do something like this, hit me up, please. I'm going to stop sharing so you can, yeah, I'm just going to move this over to here. But thanks so much for watching the workshop, the mini workshop. If you do change your routine, let me know what it was. Give me leave a comment, and it'd be good for other people to see it. Don't be a lone wolf, please. If you are ready, put your hand up, and we can work together for 3 days. And I don't bite. I'm very approachable, and I'll leave you to it. But thanks so much for watching. Rewriting your old drinking habit. I hope this helped. I hope this was valuable. And if there's any questions that you may have to any of the members, then please leave them in the comments. This will be in the classroom as well as in the community tab. So yeah, but for now, peace to all. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in Clear Days with Ned. All right, all the best. Bye for now.